And assembly time, well, I got some more stuff to do, cleaning and remanning type parts, but I can start putting together the forward reverse clutches. So everyone talks about soaking your clutches. These are the reverse forward clutches. Dipping them, I just got some wonderful cherry Kool-Aid here. It's actually ATF, of course. Soaking these, you just want to soak them until they stop making bubbles. So you see you drop it right in right away, and it suds similar to, like a pop. It's a cherry pop. You're just gonna put all your clutches in here and make sure that they get a nice coat of oil. And once they stop off gassing, you're good. So like 10 minutes, you should be fine. Installing some lip seals and cleaning some parts off. This is actually the rear piston assembly for reverse and forward. So basically what I'm doing is I'm cleaning everything off. I'm just using a plastic bin here with some acetone, making sure everything's lint-free, burr-free, making sure everything's clean. And then what I'm doing is you just get a box and it has random seals in it. This is I got this from A&Reds. It's the just general Auto Enterprises Limited parts manual. Basically, the parts in there do have the GM numbers that correspond to this column. So what I'm doing is, as I'm going through this kit to make sure I don't forget stuff, I'm actually looking as I work from the back forward. Like for example, that thrust washer is 81. It's F81. I go through here, I found F81, and I'll take a pencil, wherever it is, basically, I'll cross that out. Or for example, I've done the rear extension housing bushing, or the lip seals. I've done 14 and 15E, which is a low inner and outer low reverse clutch, 14 and 15. So once I've installed it, I check it off that sheet. And then a small pick like this is helpful to get the seals out. And you can actually look on almost all of these seals. They will actually have the numbers scribed on them. And there's a couple numbers on a few of them, but like for example, this is, focus, 863 4054. So for example, 863 4054 is the overrun clutch inner. So once you know that, that's how you know that the right seal there is going into the drum or piston or whatever assembly you're looking at. Putting seals together can be a little bit daunting, especially these lip seals. A lip seal will always work such that the lip sees the pressure. So you have the lip here that'll always ride outside, and the whole point of a lip seal is as you apply pressure, the pressure pushes that lip of the seal against the sealing surface, whether it's internal or external. And sometimes these lips are hard to get over edges and burrs and stuff like that. So what I actually do, in production, they'll have like a steel sleeve or a bullet or something that compresses it to the actual size, but you don't have all that tooling. But what I do or have done that works really great is get an old plastic school folder, this kind of oil resistant thin plastic, and cut it a little bit bigger than the diameter and literally just go like a circle around this. And that allows you to get that seal started and it won't roll that lip over. And basically just push it down until it's seated, and then once you kind of hit a stop, pull that out, and that goes down most of the time. And a good seal, you should be able to rotate it nice and easily, lubricate it with some automatic transmission fluid, and that should allow the seals to go on without rolling. And it's almost free. I mean, those are like 33 cents or something, and you get, I got a whole folder there that has probably 20 or 10 different sizes for these that you just cut out. And it keeps the seals from rolling because it's not like a shim stock or something hard. There's no burrs to cut the seal. And just to make sure, you can rock it over, find the apply hole, which is right down here, and just kind of put your finger over it and make sure, maybe pull up on the piston a little bit, put your finger over it and make sure that that seal is nice, has a nice leak-free diameter. And if you do, you're good. And installing the reverse forward clutch plates. So what I did, I dropped the rear drum in, and actually I took an old, you kind of have to support it up to get the snap ring in. I just took an old yoke, took a ratchet strap. I guess I should say I got this frame. It's an engine stand that I welded some elbows to, or some straight pieces, some nuts with some washers, bolts onto this frame, and then a nut with a bolt up top and a nut with a bolt on the bottom to do the tilt. Basically, I'm holding that transmission up nice, allows rotating it 180 degrees, but I took a ratchet strap and pulled that slip yoke up to hold the bottom of the transmission. And then I went steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction, making sure that there's a gap, or there's basically a tang on the bottom that you can only put the plate in one of four ways, basically upside down or forward. They're the same, they're all symmetric, or 180 degrees or 0 degrees. And then the frictions just drop in. And then there's a wave plate that you put at the top. I put the tabs, in my CK book, I put the tab here. Basically make sure that the tab is between a ear on the trans on each side, which mine is. Don't stick one of the ears out in the middle and no man's land here, here, or here. And then throw the snap ring down. Make sure that the snap ring gap doesn't sit in one of the windows and doesn't sit over one of the teeth, which I think on this side, my tooth is right here. So I got a 2 over and then a couple over from that side. So then kind of got to pull up with that ratchet strap so that wave plate is slightly compressed, and it's compressing against, because you're going to basically drop this piston assembly down like that. So basically all these clutches now are installed, so they go in the bin because they're used. Just installed the rear reverse forward piston assembly. Again, there's this wide kind of keyway on the bottom that does correspond to a flat keyway that's cut out on the housing. It does call in the CK book to use the piston install tool, but literally what I just did was I got this small pick. Using that pick, I was able to kind of hold it underneath a groove here. And I was basically able to hold with one hand and basically do kind of a tripod thing and pulled up with the screwdriver using my 2 fingers to keep it relatively level. And then I ran a bit of oil around the outside just so it would slip, make sure everything's clean, and it just dropped right in there. I was using like a dead blow just to lightly tap it with the handle, but it's not quite an interference, it's a slip fit between the OD of the drum or the piston and the ID of the case. If you're hitting on it, I couldn't get it to go tapping on it, but it falls right in when it's lubricated and lined up. You know it's in there all the way if you look down here. And you can see the feed hole. There's a little rubber seal in here on the backside there. And I probably should actually change that. That's probably in the kit. But basically you want that hole to align there, and then the male and female splines on the drum versus the planetary that sit inside here need to align. But basically there is quite a bit of slop on these clutch plates between the bottom of that snap ring, which is pretty loose in there, and the clutch plate, there's probably 100 thou clearance. That's how it is from what I can tell. It's fine. So Cool. Bit of a redo. I actually did get that part in the kit. It's not an O-ring, it's kind of this injected seal, and you can see the old one does have some damage on it, probably from just sitting a while. To remove it, what I did was just take this large punch. It does press into the case internally, so you have to have that drum or piston assembly out of there. Basically that punch just goes in there really nicely and out. How I'm actually going to install it is just grab this long screw, throw it in there, pull on that, and then I'm just going to grab some washers and a nut and just pull it in this way versus trying to hit it, because I should have already installed it. I'm not going to be able to really tap on that very effectively in there. So I'm just going to pull it in with this little screw tool. So the rear piston and snap ring's finally in place. I put the gap right up there. I think anywhere between here and here or down there is fine. The CK book actually shows the gap in the snap ring down there. I don't like that because that's not really supporting. It's probably a nitpicky thing, but I'd rather have it somewhere up here like I did, or maybe even down there. That's not as ideal. The next step for me is to put in the rear drum. Remember that mates up with that piece, and that has a lot of things like that in the center. My kit came with the upgraded 4-tab steel part versus the plastic thrust washer. So tossing that in the bin. I'm gonna clean this part off really well. Insert that and then take some grease to hold that in, because this whole assembly has to go in before the rear planet. So once the bottom third is in, so basically the reverse clutch plates, the planet, there's like a drum that sits down here that feeds oil from the valve body for reverse. Then you can put the intermediate parts in. So basically the front half of the drum and the center carrier that houses the first gear and third gear. And then second gear, remember, goes on that drum. The back half is supposed to have, I mean, it depends on where you read, somewhere between 2 to 4, maybe up to even 8 backlash. I just reused all my factory stuff and ended up with 7, checking with a feeler gauge between the bottom of the snap ring on the basically output shaft stub, and then to the feeler. And then next up basically is getting the thrust of the intermediate section here. So there's a thrust washer between a plastic one, unless you want a steel one, but I just went with the plastic since this is only like a 450 horsepower at most setup. So make sure you get all the pieces in there. The first thrust washer you put in, this is actually the selective one. This is like 100 thou thickness. I have 130 thou in there right now. You also have to pull up on the in-play from the output shaft somehow. The CK book I have actually has like a little L bracket that screws into the mount where the rear trans mount goes. I don't have that, and I didn't really feel like making it, but I do have that yoke. And I just, like I say, ratchet strap it to my bracket. I did throw a small bolt in the bottom of that yoke because the yoke actually bottomed out and I wasn't able to pull up. In the second stage of checking the intermediate section in play, I dropped the center support in without the iron sealing rings. I took those off that go basically feed reverse and forward or third gear in here. And what I ended up doing is just lubing everything nice with some ATF. The clutches and pistons for third are out of this drum here. I ended up just leaving in the CK manual, a few other mentioned pull all the clutches, just because it's harder to get in and out multiple times. But I got Husick, he just shipped the clearances and everything set on first in that drum, so I wasn't going to tear it apart when it's fine. As long as you line up the clutches, you have to do it anyways when you final assemble it, so that's fine. So basically, then you drop that snap ring in there, which has the taper, making sure the taper, it's hard to see, but the taper, it kind of sits like up, like that. And then take your caliper, or micrometer, or whatever it is, and go through that little hole there, go down with the depth rod, measure your baseline, and then take a screwdriver and pry up on the drum through that little window there. And then you want to have, for sure, under 10, or around 10 at most. I'm going to see where I am. I think I'm going to be too much. I don't think my washer's thick enough, so I might be kind of at a standstill now. But anyways, that's how you do that. So with the exception of a little bit of like valving with the valve body and some of the shift kit and pressure regulators, the biggest change that I'm making mostly revolves around this drum, which, because this transmission has slightly more power, or is going to live under slightly more power than the factory one. As I mentioned, this drum is upgraded. They temper and harden here. Not as good as a billet one, but it's less than half the price. I sent Husick my core and he shipped me that back. You need to ship a core to get this service. And then I did want him to supply his pack for first gear. Something also that really got changed quite a bit here is the factory plates are missing springs. So this can hold an additional 6 springs that I think some of the Grand National stuff got, but my transmission doesn't. So Husick ended up providing me a 12 spring return plate versus the factory 6. Also, a problem is that getting the clearances is important, and these apply rings here, or these spacer rings, are selective. This is like 230 some thousandths, but if I take the caliper to mine, it's only $197, $196. So when I told Husick that was too thin, he said you need a thicker plate to work with the clutches. So basically, he also asked if I had a steel or aluminum piston down there. I had an aluminum one. So again, he provided a steel one. This pack, basically, nothing got reused. The only thing that I have to send back to him is the snap rings. Basically, this piston down there that's aluminum isn't used anymore. This 6 spring retainer isn't used anymore. The piston, he already put the seal in, so we're good there. Also, very similar on the third gear side of things. The original spring retainer is missing 6 springs. The aftermarket one, or the Grand National spec one, or the one that Husick provided, has those extra springs. He also provided a billet, just an aluminum solid apply ring instead of the factory steel one that's pressed. This guy right there, you see where that split is? So I'll pull that out. put new clutches in, put new steels in. This installs into here. So this is really the biggest change. And then of course the band runs on the drum. So basically first, second, third gear are a lot more heavy duty. Fourth gear, you get that extra clutch pack. But there's, like I say, there's a lot of nuances to these 204Rs where there's aluminum parts, there's steel parts, there's different spring retainer stuff that, from what I gather at least, I haven't seen on 200 or on Turbo 400s, Turbo 350s and stuff, quite this variation, but that exists in these transmissions. So I'm gonna work on cleaning them some stuff there, loading these housings, and making the next step here. Well, now we're a day. I make some progress. I got the ring gear in. I got the overrun clutch assembled on new seals in the piston, the apply piston. Making sure to follow that diagram and how it's assembled. That's been very helpful because the parts manual doesn't have the detail you need. The pain on this part was there's a little thrust washer that mounts between the sun gear on the Planet set and the sun gear housing, and you got to put that thrust in before you put these gears in, or you got to take these gears out, the snap ring, the gears out before you can get that snap ring, or before that thrust washer. I did get that finally after messing around a bunch, dropping needles. I made sure that all the planets spin nice. They do. Dropped in the housing. Basically the only thing I have left to do on it is drop the input shaft in. Well, it goes the other way. This sits upside down. That shaft goes in. Oh, that's backwards. But basically, it's the same splines on both sides. That goes in there. Snap ring goes on. And then that drops in there. I'm still waiting for I ordered a new piston for the overdrive, then I can drop the overdrive clutches in and the overdrive piston. I'm waiting to drop the overdrive planet in until I get the overdrive apply piston in, and then I'll put the pump together after that, but making progress a little bit surely. Well, in some weird world, this is actually the last big part to drop in, which is the input shaft and the overdrive planet. I dropped the overdrive planet ring gear on. This, I got the snap ring in the bottom, and the shaft has a step in it to prevent it from going in, so that's what's holds this in. And just gotta go down here and spin it in. And I am still missing the overdrive apply piston, which does technically have to go in first along with the clutches. But since I don't have that piston yet, it's not supposed to get here till Friday, I thought I'd just drop this in to get it out of the way. So that kind of wraps up this part. The only thing that basically I have left is this is the front drum bushing. I decided not to change it because mine wasn't too bad, and this is a really tough bugger to get out. That's the front selectable shim washer, which basically will end up playing right there. Locks into the front pump assembly. This is my old one. This is the front overdrive gears, or clutches, and some used washers. So, yeah, good news. If it's strange to see more parts on the table than were in before, well, that's the case. I got a little bit ahead of myself. I I hadn't put the snap ring that holds that in yet, the center support, which is fine. I was dropping the OD, the overdrive planet and parts in. And then I knew at some point I had to get my servo placed in there. The servo I was kind of holding off because I was like, well, it's on the outside of the transmission. And actually on this transmission, because that band, it was an older transmission, when I put it behind the turbo Buick, it wouldn't shift into second wide open, like I mentioned in an earlier video. It would go through all the gears fine at like sub 2 PSI basically, like hardly on the throttle. Since it's a 4.1 with the stock Grand National turbo, so it spooled really quick, which was fun, but it wouldn't go into second under much of any power. And as a kind of lame attempt, I ended up just taking the stock servo, checking the clearance, and it was like 250 thou or something. And I've seen somewhere between 60, the Sonax book says, or the CK book says 60 thou of in play or movement from the snap ring. The Sonax manual over there says 110. So I actually welded on the end of the rod. The Sonax manual actually gives you a couple different parts. They offer a block-off plate here that gets rid of this cushion spring here. I'm keeping the cushion spring on there because it's more of a street car than a race car. And basically, and then I found all the other worn parts. But basically what I'm doing here is I got the C-clamp here to hold it in place. I ended up having to take all that stuff because the band, it seems like when they're used, they seem to have a better shape. But this band, when I put it in there, it was kind of sprung, and I actually couldn't get the pin in there to get it set. And kind of had to pull everything apart and then put a screwdriver through the band anchor location, or the movable anchor, and move it into alignment to get the pin in, because it was like sticking out probably 3/8 of an inch. And I knew I have to grind some off from the pin, but not that much. So basically, rip everything from the center support forward, which was, I'm glad I didn't put that snap ring in, because that is a biatch to get out. And just hold this in here. Basically, this groove in here, which you can't see yet, means that I have to cut probably 150 thou off that pin length, because the pin, or there's a snap ring included in this kit here. Actually, no, they don't include a snap ring. I gotta go into my deep depths of my used parts here. Anyways, I'm not gonna bore you going through this. It might be in here or down there or somewhere, but basically I got that snap ring. I gotta pop that snap ring in. Oh, actually it's in the kit. It's in the Reman kit. Oh, no, that's an O-ring. That was the spring, so don't let yourself lose that little snappy ring, because you'll be hurting. You'll be hurting if you can't find it. Hopefully I can find it in this mess of mine. Anyways, enough rambling. Making you dizzy walking around the garage here. Basically, pull it out. I'm gonna grind quite a bit off that pin because the snap ring's about 60 thou in diameter. I'm not even to the groove. Plus I need like 60 thou at least of thrust. And I'm not even at the groove. So 60 and 60 is 120, and I'm gonna say I'm about 30 thou to the groove. So I'll probably cut 120 or 150 off. I'll just do it on my lathe, grind the tip to have a nice radius like they mentioned, throw it back in and hope it's better. But yeah, the CK book I think recommends doing this first. I didn't. I thought I'd kind of skip ahead, but no, you got to do that first. Anyways, so time to throw the servo together. Read the directions this time. Sometimes I advocate not reading directions. If you don't read the directions, you're going to try to assemble the original pin, grind off most of the length. The reason they provide the pin is because you're supposed to use it. The only part you don't use is this spacer if you want to eliminate the cushion spring. This one shows eliminating the cushion spring and the bell, the spring retainer. I'm not doing that. I'm doing it this way. Something else to know is this is the stock CA valve body return spring. That's a stock Grand National BR, and that's a Sonex. So basically the Sonex return spring is the length of the CA, but the spring rate of the BR. As mentioned previously, USEC says this is the bomb and this is too stiff. So I don't know if he winds new ones of these or if it's just a BR takeout, but I'm gonna use that one and toss both of those, because apparently when you crank up the return spring too much, bad stuff happens. I can't honestly say I know why, but trust my trans guy here. So luckily I didn't have to do any grinding on this pin. Actually it had like 70 thou clearance and it says 110 in here, but the catalog everywhere else says like 60. I'm just leaving this 60, 70, 75 because that band's gonna wear in pretty quick and it's still pretty loose with 70, 80 thou clearance. So I'm just setting it like that. I'm reusing the bell, putting that snap ring or that E-ring on top, throwing that in there, and buttoning this up. So I got the overdrive piston in the mail. I dropped that in place. I also got the snap ring for the center support in. Make sure to clean the groove out, and you're going to want to put these two bolts in that hold the center support in loosely, just so that the rotation is right, because once the snap ring's in, you won't be able to get those bolts in because you can't rotate it. Don't ask me why I know that. Anyways, got the piston in, then you drop the spring retainer with the springs down, and then the snap ring holds the spring retainer in. That is kind of tough to get in. I did lock it in with those little pliers to make sure that it's fully seated. The CK book makes it just like, oh, you push down with your screwdriver on the spring and it seats. It's not quite that easy. You kind of got to fiddle with it. Make sure to put the tab of the piston in that window. I put it all the way that way because as the transmission's spinning that way, it'll probably get there. So, and now time to check the in-play of the front input shaft. I have two washers here. I got this, my original one, the blue, which is 190 thou, and this is about 190 or 184 thou. I assembled it. You're supposed to not put the O-ring on and check it, but I didn't do that. And you're supposed to wait to put the O-ring on to make it easier to put in and out. I just did it. It's not that bad. I tap it in a little bit. So I'd read through a few places to understand how to check the in-play. There's 2 clicks you can feel, and you want to feel for the second one. So the first click, you might be able to hear, that's the bottom of the snap ring hitting one of the drums inside. So when you're checking your in-play, you want to lift up, zero out, and then as you pick up farther, you can see it's that front clutch that's you're lifting. So you're lifting the whole drum assembly. That's the in-play you want to check, not this first bit of in-play. You want the second bit of in-play that's heavier. So I'm going to check that with a thicker washer and see what it looks like, because the thicker washer was what was with this unit, and everything from the front half is stock. So I'm assuming that stock was fine. And as far as checking, if you really want to get fancy, you might be able to like bolt a flange onto here that's steel. I just got my dial indicator sitting on there and it's heavy enough that it stays, but I'm just zeroing off the front face there, and I just loosely grabbed a vice grip to actually grab that because it's slippery and round, and I don't grab slippery round things very good. Michael Scott, that's what she said joke, I guess. Anyways, you can see lightly lifting up here. I got about 27 thou. And the book calls for 3 to 6 thou of that secondary in play. So I'm gonna lift up here and then up again. And I got about 4 thou, so I think I'm pretty set there. So I just reused my factory front shim. I did try the yellow one that was supplied with the kit, and it was a little bit much. So I think we're good there. Now I can start putting in the valve body. I think this part of the transmission build is done. Oh yeah.